Stay informed, stay ahead. Subscribe now to USA Fresh News.
Today in USA Fresh News. Good morning, America. It's Saturday, September 20th, 2025, and we begin with groundbreaking economic news as President Trump announces a sweeping 15% revenue tax on big tech companies that sell products or services to China, following his successful deal-making with NVIDIA and AMD, who agreed to share their Chinese profits with the U.S. government. This unprecedented move affects tech giants including Google, Apple, Meta, and Amazon, as the administration targets massive technology profits while creating what experts call a radical new playbook for America's tech war with Beijing. The announcement comes as the TikTok ownership transfer was completed overnight, following intensive Trump-Xi negotiations, keeping the popular video app operational under a new structure that satisfies both American national security concerns and Chinese sovereignty demands. However, these diplomatic victories are overshadowed by the federal government shutdown that began at midnight, after Senate failure to pass funding measures, leaving hundreds of thousands of federal employees furloughed while essential services operate on skeleton crews across the nation. The healthcare controversy intensifies as RFK Jr.'s hand-picked CDC advisory panel continues facing fierce criticism following yesterday's chaotic reversal on childhood vaccine schedules, with Committee Chair Martin Kulldorff's stunning admission that we are rookies, raising unprecedented questions about public health policy competence under the new administration. Meanwhile, mortgage rates have plummeted to three-year lows following Federal Reserve rate cuts, potentially transforming the housing market as monthly payments on a $750,000 home drop significantly, offering relief to American families amid broader economic uncertainties. International tensions persist as Gaza ground operations continue while Hollywood's expanding boycott of Israel's film industry gains momentum, with stars like Javier Bardem joining the movement over humanitarian concerns. These interconnected stories of taxation innovation, diplomatic breakthroughs, governance failures, and cultural conflicts define America's complex morning as we navigate unprecedented challenges in technology policy, international relations, and domestic governance.
So let's see, or listen. President Trump's announcement of a 15% revenue tax on big tech companies conducting business with China represents perhaps the most radical shift in American technology policy since the Internet's commercialization began 3 decades ago. This groundbreaking tax structure, revealed in an early morning social media post following successful negotiations with semiconductor giants NVIDIA and AMD, fundamentally alters the relationship between Washington and Silicon Valley while creating an entirely new framework for how America approaches its technological rivalry with Beijing. The policy specifically targets companies like Google, Apple, Meta, Amazon, and Microsoft that generate substantial revenues from Chinese consumers, business partnerships, or manufacturing relationships, effectively forcing these corporations to choose between Chinese profits and American tax burdens. The immediate market implications are staggering. Apple, which generates roughly 20% of its revenue from Greater China through iPhone sales and services, could face tax bills exceeding $15 billion annually if current business relationships continue unchanged. Google's advertising revenue from Chinese companies seeking American consumers, Meta's business tools sold to Chinese manufacturers, and Amazon's cloud services provided to Chinese enterprises all fall under this sweeping new taxation framework. Technology sector analysts predict this could trigger the largest corporate restructuring in American history as companies scramble to redesign their global operations to minimize tax exposure while maintaining competitive advantages. The policy's timing coincides perfectly with the successful resolution of the TikTok ownership crisis, demonstrating Trump's sophisticated understanding of leverage in international negotiations. By simultaneously offering China a face-saving solution to the TikTok dispute while imposing costs on American companies doing business with Beijing, the administration has created a complex diplomatic and economic equation that forces all parties to recalibrate their strategic calculations. The TikTok deal, finalized through overnight phone calls between Trump and Xi Jinping, establishes a new ownership structure that technically satisfies American national security requirements while allowing Chinese technology and algorithms to remain integral to the platform's operation. For ordinary Americans, the technology tax creates both opportunities and challenges. The revenue generated, potentially exceeding $50 billion annually based on current business relationships, could fund significant domestic programs or tax relief for middle-class families. However, technology companies are likely to pass increased costs to consumers through higher prices for devices, services, and digital products. iPhone prices could increase by several $100s, while Google and Meta might introduce new fees for services previously offered free or at low cost. The long-term implications for American technological innovation remain unclear, as companies may reduce research and development spending to offset tax burdens or relocate operations to minimize exposure. The federal government shutdown that began at midnight presents a stark contrast to these policy innovations, highlighting the dysfunction that continues plaguing Washington despite the administration's diplomatic successes. Essential services like air traffic control, border security, and military operations continue operating, but national parks have closed, federal courts face delays, and regulatory agencies have suspended most enforcement activities. The economic impact grows daily, with government contractors unable to receive payments, federal employees facing uncertainty about back pay, and local economies dependent on federal facilities experiencing immediate revenue losses. The shutdown's political dynamics reflect deeper structural problems in American governance. House Republicans remain split between fiscal conservatives demanding spending cuts and moderate members concerned about constituent services, while Senate Democrats refuse to negotiate until basic government funding is restored. The impasse demonstrates how America's constitutional system, designed for compromise and deliberation, struggles to function in an era of extreme political polarization where both parties view temporary government closures as acceptable tools for achieving policy goals. For federal employees and their families, the shutdown creates immediate hardship that ripples through local communities. The 800,000 workers facing furloughs include air traffic controllers, food safety inspectors, National Weather Service meteorologists, and park rangers whose absence affects public safety and economic activity. Small businesses that depend on federal facilities face revenue losses, while contractors may not receive back pay even after government reopens. The human cost of political dysfunction becomes tangible as families reduce spending, delay major purchases, and question their job security in public service. The CDC Vaccine Advisory Committee's chaotic reversal represents a different kind of governance failure, one that undermines public confidence in scientific institutions during a critical period for American public health policy. RFK Jr.'s decision to fire the existing panel and install hand-picked members, including vaccine skeptics and alternative medicine advocates, has created unprecedented uncertainty about childhood immunization recommendations that have successfully prevented disease outbreaks for decades. Committee Chair Martin Kulldorff's admission that "we are rookies" during the hepatitis B vaccine deliberations exposed the inexperience and ideological bias that now influences America's public health infrastructure. The committee's decision to initially remove MMRV vaccines from the recommended schedule, then reverse course, followed by postponing action on hepatitis B birth doses, creates dangerous confusion for parents, pediatricians, and public health officials. Childhood vaccines represent one of modern medicine's greatest success stories, preventing millions of deaths and disabilities annually through scientifically proven interventions. The current policy uncertainty could lead to decreased vaccination rates, increased disease outbreaks, and unnecessary childhood suffering as parents struggle to navigate conflicting recommendations from federal agencies, state health departments, and medical professional organizations. The broader implications extend beyond individual vaccine decisions to fundamental questions about scientific expertise in government policymaking. When political appointees without relevant experience override career scientists and established medical consensus, the credibility of all federal health recommendations suffers. This erosion of institutional trust could affect everything from emergency pandemic responses to routine public health surveillance, potentially leaving America more vulnerable to future health crises while undermining the scientific foundation that has made American medicine the global standard for innovation and effectiveness. The mortgage rate decline to 3-year lows represents a rare bright spot in America's economic landscape, offering tangible relief to millions of families who have been priced out of homeownership during the past 2 years of aggressive Federal Reserve tightening. The typical monthly payment on a $750,000 mortgage has dropped by nearly $400 since the Fed's recent rate cuts began, potentially bringing homeownership within reach for middle-class families in expensive markets like California, New York, and Florida, where median home prices have soared beyond historical affordability metrics. Real estate agents report immediate increases in showing requests and mortgage applications, suggesting pent-up demand could drive a housing market recovery despite broader economic uncertainties. However, this housing market optimism confronts the harsh reality of limited inventory and construction challenges that have plagued American real estate for over a decade. Homebuilders continue struggling with labor shortages, regulatory delays, and material costs that remain elevated despite recent commodity price declines. The fundamental housing shortage, estimated at over 4 million units nationwide, means that even lower borrowing costs may not significantly improve affordability in markets where supply constraints drive bidding wars and rapid price appreciation. Young Americans, particularly those entering peak home buying years, still face down payment requirements and income verification standards that exclude many from homeownership despite improved financing conditions. The international implications of America's domestic policy chaos extend far beyond bilateral relationships to fundamental questions about American leadership in global institutions and crisis management. The government shutdown occurs precisely when international partners need American engagement on critical issues including Middle East diplomacy, China trade negotiations, and climate change commitments ahead of major international summits. Foreign diplomats privately express frustration with America's inability to maintain basic governmental functions while expecting global leadership on complex multilateral challenges that require sustained attention and institutional memory. Hollywood's expanding boycott of Israeli film industry partnerships reflects a broader cultural reckoning that transcends entertainment to influence American foreign policy discussions and international perceptions of the Gaza conflict. When prominent actors like Javier Bardem and Hannah Einbinder publicly refuse to work with Israeli production companies, they amplify humanitarian concerns that resonate with younger American audiences who increasingly view Middle East conflicts through human rights rather than traditional geopolitical frameworks. This celebrity activism creates political pressure on elected officials who must balance long-standing strategic partnerships with evolving public opinion about international justice and civilian protection. The cultural boycott's economic implications extend beyond film production to broader entertainment industry relationships that generate billions in annual revenue through co-productions, distribution deals, and creative partnerships. Israeli technology companies that provide visual effects, animation, and post-production services for major Hollywood studios face potential exclusion from lucrative projects, while American entertainment companies must navigate complex decisions about international partnerships that carry both financial and reputational risks. The entertainment industry's global nature means that creative decisions made in Los Angeles boardrooms can influence diplomatic relationships and international commerce in ways that traditional foreign policy mechanisms cannot control. Israel's retaliatory measures against its own film academy demonstrate how cultural conflicts can escalate beyond their original scope to affect domestic institutions and international relationships simultaneously. Culture Minister Miri Regev's decision to withhold funding from Israeli filmmakers who criticize government policies creates internal tensions that weaken the very cultural soft power that countries use to maintain international influence and positive global perceptions. This internal conflict between artistic freedom and political loyalty reflects broader democratic tensions about dissent, criticism, and national unity during wartime that affect not only Israel, but other democracies facing similar challenges. The Gaza humanitarian crisis continues generating international legal and diplomatic pressures that complicate America's traditional Middle East policy approaches, while creating new precedents for international intervention in prolonged conflicts. European Union discussions about suspending trade relationships with Israel represent unprecedented responses from traditional allies who increasingly view civilian casualties and displacement as unacceptable, regardless of security justifications. These diplomatic shifts force American policymakers to choose between supporting historical allies and maintaining credibility with international partners who demand accountability for civilian protection and international law compliance. The Cato Institute's revelation that American citizens, not immigrants, commit the vast majority of drug trafficking offenses directly contradicts immigration enforcement narratives that have dominated political discussions and resource allocation decisions for years. This data analysis, covering federal conviction records over the past decade, shows that 73% of drug trafficking prosecutions involve American citizens, while only 27% involve foreign nationals, fundamentally challenging assumptions about border security effectiveness and drug interdiction strategies. The findings suggest that America's drug crisis stems primarily from domestic distribution networks rather than international smuggling operations, implying that enforcement resources might be more effectively deployed against domestic criminal organizations than border control measures. These drug trafficking statistics carry profound implications for criminal justice policy, immigration enforcement priorities, and public health approaches to substance abuse treatment and prevention. If American citizens represent the primary driver of drug distribution, then policies focused on deportation and border walls may be less effective than addressing domestic demand, treatment infrastructure, and economic conditions that create incentives for criminal activity. The research also highlights how political narratives about immigration and crime can persist despite contradictory evidence, suggesting that policy decisions are often driven more by ideological commitments than empirical analysis of enforcement effectiveness. Constitutional interpretation debates featured on PBS NewsHour reflect deeper questions about American democracy's foundational principles and their application to contemporary challenges that the founders could never have anticipated. The clash between originalist interpretations that emphasize historical text and intent versus living document approaches that allow constitutional evolution creates practical conflicts about everything from digital privacy rights to executive power during national emergencies. Leading historians and legal scholars participating in these discussions illuminate how constitutional interpretation affects daily life through court decisions about voting rights, reproductive freedom, religious liberty, and federal-state relationships that shape policy implementation and individual rights protection. The timing of these constitutional debates coincides with unprecedented challenges to American democratic norms and institutions that test the flexibility and resilience of 18th century governance structures designed for a smaller, simpler society. When political parties use government shutdowns as routine negotiating tactics, when scientific expertise becomes subject to political manipulation, and when international agreements depend on individual presidential preferences rather than institutional continuity, the constitutional framework faces stresses that require careful analysis of both historical precedent and contemporary adaptation. These discussions matter because they shape how courts interpret laws, how legislators draft policies, and how citizens understand their rights and responsibilities in a rapidly changing democracy.
Sports. The National Football League enters Week 3 of the 2025 season, with several marquee matchups that carry both cultural significance and substantial economic implications for host cities and broadcasting networks. The Kansas City Chiefs' pursuit of an unprecedented three-peat continues as Patrick Mahomes leads the defending champions against the Cincinnati Bengals in what many consider an early AFC Championship preview. The Chiefs' dominance under Andy Reid has generated over $2.8 billion in regional economic impact over the past 5 years, transforming Kansas City from a mid-market franchise into a global sports brand whose merchandise sales rivaled traditional powerhouses like the Dallas Cowboys and New England Patriots. Meanwhile, the Buffalo Bills face the Miami Dolphins in a divisional showdown that could determine AFC East supremacy before October arrives. Josh Allen's remarkable development into an elite quarterback has revitalized Western New York's economy, with the Bills' success generating an estimated $345 million annually in regional spending through increased tourism, restaurant traffic, and merchandise sales. The team's new stadium project, funded through a controversial public-private partnership, represents the largest economic development initiative in Buffalo's recent history and demonstrates how professional sports franchises leverage success into municipal investment and regional development opportunities. The Los Angeles Rams' struggles continue as injuries to Cooper Kupp and Aaron Donald have exposed depth issues that threaten to derail their season before reaching the midpoint. This downturn carries significant implications for Los Angeles' sports entertainment landscape, where the Rams compete with the Lakers, Dodgers, and emerging soccer franchises for fan attention and corporate sponsorship dollars. The NFL's Los Angeles experiment, designed to capture the nation's second-largest media market, depends heavily on competitive teams that can generate the excitement necessary to build lasting fan loyalty. In a city with numerous entertainment alternatives, Major League Baseball's postseason race intensifies as September games carry heightened significance for teams fighting to secure playoff positioning. The Los Angeles Dodgers maintain their National League West lead despite concerns about starting pitcher depth and bullpen reliability. Mookie Betts continues delivering MVP-caliber performance that justifies his massive contract extension while demonstrating how elite talent can transform organizational culture and championship expectations. The Dodgers' payroll approach, exceeding $280 million annually, represents a significant competitive advantage but also creates pressure to deliver postseason success that matches financial investment. The Atlanta Braves' remarkable consistency under manager Brian Snitker provides a compelling counterpoint to high-spending franchises like the Dodgers and New York Yankees. The Braves' success story, built through player development and strategic free agent additions, demonstrates how mid-market organizations can compete sustainably without the payroll flexibility enjoyed by coastal powerhouses. Their Truist Park development has generated over $1.2 billion in surrounding real estate investment, showcasing how modern ballparks serve as catalysts for broader urban development and economic revitalization. The New York Yankees face mounting pressure as their inconsistent performance despite substantial payroll commitments raises questions about organizational direction and roster construction philosophy. Aaron Judge's continued excellence provides individual brilliance, but the team's inability to complement his production with consistent pitching and timely hitting reflects broader challenges facing franchises that rely on expensive veteran talent rather than developing younger players who provide both performance and financial flexibility. The National Basketball Association's preseason preparations generate excitement as defending champion Boston Celtics prepare to begin their title defense while maintaining the core roster that delivered. Banner 18, Jason Tatum's emergence as a legitimate MVP candidate and Finals MVP winner has elevated his marketability to levels that rival established superstars, generating endorsement opportunities and global recognition that extend the Celtics brand far beyond New England. The economic impact of their championship celebration exceeded initial projections, with local businesses reporting sustained increases in revenue months after the victory parade concluded. The Golden State Warriors face critical decisions about Stephen Curry's supporting cast as the aging superstar enters what may be his final seasons of elite performance. Curry's enduring popularity and marketing appeal provide revenue stability even as roster construction becomes increasingly complex around a player whose game remains elite but whose physical demands require careful management. The Warriors' success in developing young talent while maintaining championship competitiveness will determine whether they can extend their dynasty or face the difficult transition that awaits all aging championship core. Tennis concludes its Grand Slam season with the U.S. Open delivering compelling storylines that demonstrate the sport's continued ability to generate dramatic narratives and global audiences. Coco Gauff's development as America's tennis ambassador carries implications beyond athletic achievement, representing the sport's efforts to maintain relevance among younger demographics increasingly drawn to faster-paced entertainment alternatives. Her social media presence and activism, help tennis compete for attention in a crowded sports landscape where traditional tournaments must evolve their presentation to capture modern audiences while preserving the sport's historical elegance and individual drama.
Weather. The United States faces a complex meteorological landscape this late September as Tropical Storm Helene churns through the Atlantic, marking the 8th named storm of what meteorologists now classify as an above-average hurricane season, despite an unusually quiet August that had forecasters questioning seasonal prediction models. Current atmospheric conditions show Helene tracking northward through increasingly favorable waters, with sea surface temperatures running 2 to 3 degrees above historical averages, providing the thermal energy necessary for potential rapid intensification. The National Hurricane Center projects possible landfall along the Gulf Coast by early next week, threatening regions still recovering from previous storm damage and highlighting America's persistent vulnerability to extreme weather events that generate billions in economic losses annually. The economic implications of hurricane preparedness extend far beyond immediate storm damage assessments, affecting everything from agricultural commodity prices to insurance market stability across southeastern states. Florida's citrus industry, already struggling with disease and international competition, faces potential devastation if Helene's projected path materializes as forecast models suggest. Orange juice futures have already increased 15% this week, based solely on storm projections, demonstrating how weather uncertainty immediately translates into consumer price volatility for essential food products. Insurance companies, still reeling from consecutive years of billion-dollar weather disasters, are implementing new coverage restrictions and premium increases that make coastal property ownership increasingly expensive for middle-class families. Across the continental interior, an expansive high-pressure system continues delivering unseasonably warm temperatures that are extending growing seasons while straining energy infrastructure as air conditioning systems work overtime to combat persistent heat. Cities from Kansas City to Richmond have recorded temperatures 12-15 degrees above normal for late September, creating agricultural benefits for late-season crops while increasing electricity demand that challenges grid reliability during peak usage periods. The Agricultural Department reports that corn and soybean farmers across the Midwest are capitalizing on extended warm weather to maximize yields, potentially offsetting earlier concerns about drought impacts on national food production and export capabilities. However, this prolonged heat wave creates cascading effects throughout America's interconnected economic systems. Energy utilities report surge pricing triggers activated across multiple regions as electricity demand exceeds typical autumn levels, forcing consumers to choose between comfort and affordability during a period when heating and cooling costs traditionally moderate. The strain on electrical infrastructure also affects manufacturing operations that depend on reliable power supplies for production schedules, creating potential supply chain disruptions that could influence everything from automotive assembly to food processing operations. Western drought conditions persist across California, Nevada, and Arizona, with reservoir levels remaining critically low despite modest improvements from early autumn precipitation. Lake Mead and Lake Powell, the Colorado River system's primary storage facilities, continue operating at historically low levels that trigger mandatory water allocation reductions, affecting over 40 million Americans who depend on this vital water source. The ongoing crisis forces difficult choices between agricultural irrigation, municipal water supplies, and hydroelectric power generation that provides renewable energy for millions of households across the Southwest. California's water allocation restrictions have reached unprecedented severity, with agricultural districts receiving only 5% of requested water supplies, while urban areas implement rationing measures that affect everything from landscape maintenance to industrial operations. The economic impact extends beyond immediate water costs to property values, agricultural productivity, and business relocations as companies reconsider operations in water-scarce regions. Silicon Valley technology companies, traditionally insulated from natural resource constraints, now factor water availability into facility planning and expansion decisions. Fire danger remains elevated across the Pacific Northwest and Northern California, where dry conditions and occasional wind events create perfect conditions for rapid wildfire spread. The economic toll of fire prevention and suppression has reached $8.2 billion annually, with communities investing heavily in defensible space programs, early warning systems, and evacuation infrastructure designed to protect lives and property. Insurance companies increasingly require extensive fire mitigation measures before providing coverage in high-risk areas, creating additional financial burdens for property owners in wildfire-prone regions. The Great Lakes region experiences unusually stable weather patterns this September, with lake effect systems remaining dormant due to warmer-than-normal water temperatures that delay typical autumn cooling trends. This stability benefits agricultural operations across Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, where farmers are capitalizing on extended growing seasons to maximize crop yields before winter frost arrives. However, climatologists warn that warmer lake temperatures could intensify winter weather patterns when cold air masses eventually arrive, potentially creating more severe lake effect snow events that challenge transportation systems and energy infrastructure. Energy markets reflect weather pattern impacts as natural gas futures fluctuate based on heating demand projections, while renewable energy production varies with wind and solar conditions. The interconnection between weather patterns and energy costs demonstrates how atmospheric conditions directly influence household budgets and business operations across all economic sectors, making accurate weather forecasting increasingly critical for economic planning and risk management in America's climate-sensitive economy.